In this episode, we are focusing on a skill that becomes incredibly important once security work moves beyond individual judgment and into real organizational decision-making. A risk analysis workshop is one of the simplest ways to bring people together to talk through uncertainty, business impact, and security priorities in a structured setting. For a beginner, that matters because risk is rarely understood well by one person alone, no matter how experienced that person may be. The people who understand the business process, the technology, the data, the operational pressure, and the likely consequences of disruption are often spread across different parts of the organization. A good workshop helps those perspectives meet in one place so the group can build a shared view of what matters most. When conducted well, a workshop is not just a meeting with a security label attached. It becomes a practical decision tool that helps an organization identify meaningful risks, compare them honestly, and decide what should happen next. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A risk analysis workshop is best understood as a guided discussion where the right people examine a defined business area, system, project, or process and evaluate what could go wrong, how likely it is, and what the consequences could be. The workshop format matters because security risk is often misunderstood when it is assessed in isolation through forms, spreadsheets, or disconnected interviews. One person may see a technical weakness but not understand its business importance. Another may understand the business importance very well, but have little sense of how exposed the supporting technology really is. The workshop creates a setting where those pieces can be brought together in real time. It is not meant to replace all other forms of risk assessment, but it is especially useful when the organization needs informed discussion rather than only static reporting. For new learners, this is a useful mindset shift. Good risk analysis is often collaborative, and one of the main jobs of a workshop is to turn separate fragments of knowledge into a more complete and more usable picture. That collaborative design is important because many organizations struggle not from lack of information, but from information being scattered and disconnected. A technology team may know where systems are fragile. A business team may know which process failures would create the greatest operational damage. Legal or compliance partners may understand where obligations create additional pressure if something goes wrong. Leadership may understand what kind of disruption the organization can tolerate and what kind it cannot. If those views remain separate, risk decisions become weak or inconsistent. A workshop helps solve that problem by creating a shared moment of analysis rather than a chain of isolated opinions. This is also why workshops are often especially helpful during change. A new project, a major vendor relationship, a cloud migration, a merger, or a shift in business operations may introduce risks that no single team fully understands yet. Bringing the right people together early helps the organization move from assumption to shared understanding before a weakness becomes an incident. An effective workshop begins with having the right people in the room, and that is more important than having the largest possible attendance list. Beginners sometimes assume a workshop is stronger if more people are invited, but too many participants can make the discussion slow, cautious, and unfocused. The goal is not to fill seats. The goal is to gather the people who actually understand the area being analyzed and who can speak credibly about operations, technology, data, process ownership, and likely business consequences. That often includes a business owner, someone from security, someone who understands the system or platform, and others whose roles connect directly to the topic under review. In some cases, privacy, legal, audit, procurement, or continuity representatives may also be valuable depending on what is being discussed. A subject matter expert, SME, can be extremely helpful, but the workshop should not become dependent on one person answering everything. Strong workshops balance expertise with perspective so the discussion stays grounded without becoming narrow or overly technical. Preparation is what separates a productive workshop from a room full of smart people talking in circles. The facilitator needs to know what the workshop is about, what decision or output is expected, what part of the business is in scope, and what background information participants need before the discussion begins. If the scope is vague, participants will drift into side topics, compare unrelated issues, and leave unsure about what was actually accomplished. Good preparation means defining the subject clearly enough that people know what they are there to analyze. It also means collecting enough context so the group does not spend most of its time discovering basic facts that should have been understood beforehand. That context might include the purpose of the business process, a summary of key systems involved, important dependencies, prior incidents, known control concerns, recent changes, or external pressures that make the topic important now. Preparation is not about scripting the conclusion. It is about making sure the group can spend its energy on analysis rather than on confusion. The facilitator plays a central role, and this is one of the most misunderstood parts of conducting a workshop well. Many people assume the facilitator is simply the person who books the meeting and keeps time, but effective facilitation is much more than that. The facilitator guides the flow of discussion, keeps the group focused on the purpose, makes sure important voices are heard, and helps the participants move from raw observations to usable judgments. That person does not need to dominate the content or behave as if every answer must come from security. In fact, the best facilitators often create enough structure that others can contribute more clearly and confidently. A good facilitator listens for ambiguity, asks clarifying questions, challenges vague assumptions politely, and keeps the workshop from becoming either too abstract or too detailed. This role also includes protecting the tone of the discussion. People are more likely to speak honestly when they feel the workshop is about understanding risk rather than assigning blame for every weakness that comes to light. Creating the right tone matters because risk workshops can fail quietly when participants become defensive, cautious, or unwilling to speak with candor. If people believe the workshop is really a disguised fault-finding session, they may avoid admitting uncertainty, downplay weaknesses, or protect their part of the organization instead of helping the group see the full picture. That is why effective workshops usually begin with a simple but important understanding that the purpose is to evaluate exposure and improve decision-making, not to embarrass individuals or shame teams for existing limitations. This does not mean avoiding hard truths. It means structuring the conversation so people can discuss them honestly. The facilitator should also make clear that uncertainty is acceptable. Not every participant will have every answer, and pretending otherwise often leads to weak conclusions dressed up as confidence. A strong workshop creates room for informed judgment, reasonable disagreement, and open discussion about where more evidence may still be needed before a final rating or response is set. Once the workshop begins, the discussion should start with business context before diving into controls, threats, or scoring. This is one of the most important habits for beginners to learn, because security discussions often become distorted when technical details are examined before the group agrees on what the organization is actually trying to protect. The first meaningful question is not what can be hacked, but what process, service, decision, or dependency matters here and why it matters to the business. A customer payment platform, a human resources process, a third-party data exchange, and a manufacturing control environment all carry different consequences if they fail or are misused. The workshop should therefore ground itself in the basic business reality of the subject under review. What function does it support? Who relies on it? What kind of data, trust, timing, or availability requirement is involved? What would the organization struggle to do if this process were disrupted, manipulated, or exposed? Starting this way keeps the analysis anchored in consequence rather than drifting into generic security language. After the business context is clear, the group can begin identifying what could realistically go wrong. This part of the workshop should remain structured, because unstructured brainstorming can become noisy and produce more heat than light. A useful approach is to examine the process or environment through a few practical lenses. What could interrupt it? What could expose sensitive information? What could allow unauthorized action? What dependency could fail in a way that creates harm? What control weakness, business pressure, or human behavior could make the situation more likely? The point is not to imagine every fantasy scenario. The point is to uncover credible ways the organization could face loss, disruption, compliance trouble, reputational harm, or operational confusion. Participants often contribute most effectively when they are asked to connect risk to actual work rather than abstract threat categories. A person who struggles to describe threats in formal security language may still give a very valuable answer when asked what kind of failure would cause the biggest headache for the team, the customer, or the business leader responsible for the process. As the possible scenarios take shape, the workshop usually moves into discussion of likelihood and impact, and this is where structure becomes especially important. Without structure, participants may use words like likely, serious, or manageable in ways that sound aligned, but actually mean very different things to each person. A strong workshop uses defined criteria, or at least common framing questions, so the group is evaluating risk on something closer to the same basis. For likelihood, the group might consider how exposed the environment is, how attractive the target is, how often similar failures occur, and how strong the current controls appear in actual practice. For impact, the group might discuss business interruption, customer effect, financial consequence, legal or regulatory pressure, recovery difficulty, and leadership attention required if the event occurred. Even when the organization uses qualitative categories, the reasoning behind the category should be discussed clearly. The rating itself matters less than whether the group can explain why it arrived there. That explanation is what makes the workshop output defensible, useful, and easier to revisit later. One of the most valuable things a workshop can do is help people distinguish among several concepts that often get mixed together during risk discussions. Participants may describe a known problem, a missing control, a feared event, an assumption, and a business consequence as if they are all the same thing when they are not. An effective facilitator helps untangle those pieces. A vulnerability is not the same as the loss that might result from it. A control weakness is not the same as the threat that could exploit it. An unresolved issue is not automatically a high-priority risk, and a scary possible event is not necessarily plausible enough to drive action right now. When those distinctions are blurred, workshops generate confusion instead of clarity. When those distinctions are handled well, the group becomes much more capable of writing meaningful risk statements, assigning ownership, and deciding what kind of follow-up is needed. Much of the value of a workshop lies in this translation work. It takes scattered concern and turns it into a clearer understanding of what the exposure actually is. Group dynamics can strengthen or weaken a workshop more than many beginners expect. A discussion may look active on the surface while still producing poor results if one senior person dominates the room, if a technical expert dismisses business concerns too quickly, or if quieter participants with valuable knowledge never get the chance to speak. There are also common biases that can distort workshop outcomes. People may anchor too heavily on the first idea mentioned, assume the future will resemble the recent past, or rate issues lower because no major incident has happened yet. Some teams drift toward optimism because they are used to making things work under pressure and underestimate what could happen in a more severe event. Others drift toward alarm because they are reacting to recent headlines rather than their own environment. Good facilitation helps manage all of this by drawing out different perspectives, testing assumptions gently, and bringing the group back to evidence, business context, and realistic reasoning. Effective workshops do not eliminate bias completely, but they reduce its influence by making the reasoning more visible and more open to challenge. Documentation is where the workshop turns from a useful conversation into an asset the organization can act on later. If the discussion is rich but the output is weak, much of the value will fade quickly once participants return to daily work. Good workshop documentation should capture what was in scope, who participated, what main scenarios or concerns were discussed, how the group evaluated likelihood and impact, and what rationale supported the final judgments. It should also record important assumptions, open questions, and any areas where the group lacked enough information to be fully confident. Most importantly, it should make ownership and next steps visible. If a workshop identifies a serious concern but nobody leaves with responsibility for follow-up, the analysis may remain interesting but not useful. Clear documentation allows the output to feed risk registers, management reporting, remediation planning, or future reassessment. It also helps later reviewers understand that the result was not a random label, but a considered judgment made by people who understood the business and the environment at the time. The workshop does not truly succeed until something happens afterward. Follow-up is essential because risk analysis is only valuable when it influences decisions, priorities, or action. That does not mean every workshop must lead to an immediate project or major spending request. In some cases, the right outcome is better monitoring, a clearer owner, more evidence gathering, or a decision to accept a risk knowingly for a period of time. In other cases, the workshop may reveal that a control needs improvement, a vendor relationship needs review, a system needs stronger oversight, or a business process has grown more dependent on fragile assumptions than leaders realized. Whatever the result, the organization should communicate it clearly and revisit it when conditions change. A workshop should not be treated as a one-time performance. It is part of a broader risk management cycle that includes assessment, ownership, response, reporting, and review. When follow-up is strong, participants see that the workshop mattered, and that increases the quality of future participation as well. By the end of this discussion, the main lesson should feel practical and clear. Conducting an effective risk analysis workshop is not about gathering a room full of people and hoping useful ideas appear on their own. It is about preparing carefully, inviting the right voices, grounding the discussion in business context, structuring the analysis, managing group dynamics, documenting the reasoning, and making sure the results lead somewhere meaningful. For a new learner, this is an important skill because workshops are one of the most realistic ways organizations make sense of uncertainty together. They allow business, technology, and security perspectives to meet in one place and shape a shared view of what matters most. When run poorly, they feel slow, vague, and performative. When run well, they become a disciplined way to identify real exposure, strengthen decisions, and improve the organization's ability to talk about risk in a way that is honest, useful, and connected to the business it is trying to protect.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.